Hey everyone, and welcome back to Hack and Hustle. I'm Anthony Johnson.
And I'm Brad Rager. And this week, we'll be talking about doing your diligence on a potential new employer. And I'll note that today the focus is really on understanding and sussing out the company itself. We'll have a future episode on the people side of this and how you think about a new boss and new colleagues and that type of stuff. But today, we really want to talk about the company itself and how do you understand if this place is going to be a good place for you to work or not. All right, Anthony, good to see you,
And
man.
before we jump though. We it's so what's so crazy about roles, people getting new jobs is a lot of times, especially I think early in your career, you're always like, oh, who's going to pay me more? Who's going to, where am I going to get more money? And eventually you start to realize, no, there's a lot of other things that matter. Maybe they're more important than money, right? Which is crazy a little bit.
That is so true. And I think if you were to actually ask people and poll people and understand how they work and how they tick, the percentage of people whose happiness is really truly mostly genuinely dictated by how much money they're making is like 5% of the population or less.
Yeah.
It's a thing. It's not unimportant, and you need to know how to use comp if you want to take somebody away from a job that they like. But I think people overestimate how much it is of the whole thing, and I think people underestimate and I don't know, that just don't do the work oftentimes when they're thinking about a new job to really understand if it's a place that they're going to be happy. So you get a lot of
Exactly.
trial and error.
It totally is. It really really is. But it's something that you kind of figure out. Like, but let's get into it. I know we have a bunch of topic pieces, so let's jam.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, maybe when I'd love to just hear your thoughts on this. Like, as you think about, I'll tell you about my career, but as you think about your career, good calls, bad calls, what do you think? Like, are there patterns in your own decision making that you've seen that you've learned? I'll share some of mine, but I'd love to hear. You've been a lot of places, man. You're doing something that's very different than where you were, 10 years ago. Tell me about some of your lessons.
So I think it's important to give people the context, right? When I was younger, I was absolutely that guy who was compensation salary driven. Period. Right. I had the mentality of like, listen, if you want to yell at me, but you're going to pay me a lot of money, okay, right? Like I'll just do this, and it partly comes from the aspect like I grew up really really poor, right? And so I was willing to make that trade off. And then you're right, you get to a point you're like, I don't know that it's worth that, right? And it matters because it impacts your mental health, just how you feel when you go home. But I would say early in my career, I was willing to put up with a lot more stuff,
Yeah,
and I learned a lot. I mean, I think that you do learn a lot from hard, terrible bosses,
you do.
and you learn, and
at,
you're like,
at
okay,
least as much as from the great ones. I always
yeah,
said you take away the things that you hate and you don't want to do with the bad ones, and you take away the stuff that you do want to do with the good ones.
exactly. You're like, oh, I will never talk to somebody like that. I know what that feels like. I'm not going to make somebody feel like that, right? And I think that overall that makes you a better leader. So, but I've had some really interesting successes, some great points of places I've been. But I will say that I do subscribe to the finding the right balance is so key, and finding the right culture in a company, right? And that is hard to suss out very much in the beginning.
I think culture is the big thing. I mean, of everything, I think it matters tremendously to people's day in and day out happiness,
Yeah,
and it's also requires a bit of thought and creativity to understand in the get-go, because there's a lot of bullshit that people will throw at you about a company culture, right? It is not what is written down in the company value statements and mission statements. It's not on shiny placards. It is how people work with each other. It is the political nature of the environment. It is who gets fired and who gets hired. It is how people speak with each other, treat each other, challenge each other. And when people are unhappy, it's usually because of the culture of the company. Again, it's not easy because I think the percent of folks that when they're in sell mode with a candidate, they've got somebody on the line they really like, the percent of people who really tell the truth completely about what is going on at the company, I think is relatively low. I think people
Yeah.
assume that they have to put a sheen on everything and
Yep.
just get them in the door. I take a very different perspective, because I think there is no perfect company. There is no perfect environment. Um, I don't want somebody to come in and be surprised about what their challenge is going to be and what the dynamics are going to be, because then they're going to leave, right? Particularly if they're really, really strong. So I'd rather have people understand the good and the bad than only get the sales pitch on the good. But I know that I'm like weird in that respect, and that most folks that hire people aren't like that. and
It is super, it's super interesting. What actually matters, and what's really funny is that, like, if you talk to somebody who works in like a nonprofit, or they're super mission oriented, it is fascinating just to kind of see, how they play it out, right? How they
Right.
prioritize things. But it's kind of a wild bit there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think there are a lot of oversights that people have in this diligence process. I think one of the big things that people miss is they don't make the opportunities to fully do the diligence, right?
Yeah.
So they will have the time for questions at the end of an interview, and usually that's like 5 minutes, and they'll say, what do you think the culture's like? And that might be about as deep as they go. I think that if you reflect on how, like, I think about my own career, right, and mistakes that I've made and lessons that I've learned. And one of those lessons is just how important it is to understand the company, the industry, and kind of all facets of it, including the culture coming into it. And I will go to unnatural lengths to do that, right? Like, I will reach out to people on LinkedIn that have recently left. I'll understand that probably they're going to be biased against it. So you kind of have to keep that as a lens. But
But here's the
I,
tough part, though, Brad. Right? Like, and I think that this is, and I think that there's like some cultural aspects, like there's of like how we kind of grow up as people too, right?
yeah,
Like, that impact it, right? And you actually see this in the dynamic between women and men applying for roles as well,
yeah,
right? Like, I grew up in there was very much a, if you can do this, if they offer it to you, if you're lucky enough, you take it, right? Kind of mentality. And so when I think a lot of times when candidates are applying, they think, and they're not trying to suss out the other side. They're trying to prove that, like, they think the only part of the equation that matters is that they are good enough to be there, right? And so instead of them trying to figure out, like, hey, is this a good fit for me, they're just trying to sell themselves the whole time. And when you're young and early, and you're just trying to get your first break or a couple breaks, like, that's what you got to do sometimes. That's what it feels like. And then
it
as you
is.
get older, you're like, like, you need to spend more time understanding the balance, I think.
I think that's true. I don't think there's a lot of downside to doing it though. Like, I don't think that doing your diligence increases the risk that you're not going to get the job. If anything else, asking really good and thoughtful questions should indicate to an employer that you're thoughtful, you care a lot, you hold a high standard, and you're a talented person. And that should actually make them want you more. Now, maybe they won't think that way, and maybe that's a red flag.
It's true. I think that they should they should be doing it. It's the right thing to do. It's the right behavior, right?
Yeah.
But just like culturally, mentally, like it's really funny. I saw this it was a TED talk and then the research report that got linked. It's like even just from a gender norm perspective, right? Women will self-select out of applying for a role unless they meet all 15 criteria.
Yeah.
Where guys like I mean, one of them, I'm going in, right? Like, and it's this really weird piece. But then you take it into, you know, are they doing the due diligence? And I think that some people are just like, hey, you know what? I don't care about the culture. They think they don't care about the culture. I'm just going to prove that I can get the job because they want to win, air quotes. And then when they won, they're like, oh my goodness, this is something I should have kind of like vetted out. And I think that a lot of that comes with wisdom of really realizing the importance. But you're right. The way you do it is you talk to people who work there, you talk to people who are there, somebody who recently left, maybe ideally somebody who left on good terms,
Right.
right?
Right.
And I think that's really helpful.
Right.
But yeah, all super important.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, One of the things that I didn't quite have an appreciation of when I was earlier in my career, right? Like the first place I was in my career was a consulting firm, and they had a great culture, and it was all about the team that you were working with and the problem you were working on. And those were the things I kind of came out and I cared about when I was looking for my first job after consulting. And I went into really like a terrible industry, but thinking, hey, I can go make a difference and it'll be fine. And I like the people I'm working with. And I realized just how much industry context really mattered, because
Does
this
yeah,
company was in an industry that was never going to be growing. It was kind of in structural slow decline. The customers that we sold to were all cutting costs, and it was just vicious and brutal. And managing a business through a decline is not fun. And I realized that about myself, and I realized how important that context was. And security is obviously a great industry. There's so many dynamics propelling it forward, and the whole cat and mouse dynamic, and the industry is relatively immature. I mean, it's not a bad place to be, but there are segments of the cybersecurity industry that are very different from each other, and spaces that are very different from each other, and ones that are more mature and less mature, and early stage startups, and companies that are really probably features, and companies that could be platforms but they're not, and how do they compete against the big guys. And I think
yeah,
there's all of these nuances in our industry that I think are actually super super important to understand going in, because it's going to determine, if you're in sales, it's going to determine your addressable market, it's going to determine your competitive landscape, it's going to determine willingness to pay, it's going to determine how much you're fighting against doing nothing. Like,
100%.
it matters so much. And I don't know that folks often enough go to take the time to really understand the market and the submarket of the companies that they're talking to before they go into a job.
Yeah, I 100%. There's just a lot of like, and especially if it's a new industry, right? Like, because sales is not sales, not sales, right? Like in cyber is so relationship heavy, and you can't show up as the sales guy, right? It's a super fascinating kind of dynamic that we have in our industry, but um I think the really hard part though is figuring out like what's it actually like on the inside,
Yeah.
right? So I think that is a tough part. Well, like, I guess the question that I would ask, like, what mistakes do you see that people make either before they come in or once they're in, like because there's a lot of there's obviously a lot of things that they can miss, but like, what are the things that you're like, hey, you really should have done this? Is it just simple like you were talking about, like talk to people or
I really think it is talking to people, and it's asking good questions, and it's asking questions that come out of a basis of understanding what are the things that people are most likely to say 6, 12. 24 months down the road, oh my God, I wish I knew this coming into it. Right. And there's a set of things that people think about in patterns when they say, man, I wish I had seen this. I wish I'd asked this question. I wish I'd known. Right. And I think, some of them are market specific, right? And kind of understanding who the customers are and what the market size is and where it's going and how urgent of a problem is it and where does it sit on customers' priority lists, right? And who the competitors are. Some of it's company specific, right? How much funding do you have? What's your runway? What's your growth plan? What does success look like? Like, what are your year over year quota attainment
How does that feel? Yeah.
goals, right? Like how is success going to be judged? How are you going to, develop my own knowledge and skills, right? Like the stuff about the company and the business and the product itself, right? Just even think about that. Like,
But what if
you
you?
know,
What if you're not a techie geek person, and you're like, the only thing I know is what I hear, the buzz. Should they be reading the Gartner reports? Like, because sometimes if you interview for a role and you're like, hey, can I talk to a customer? They're like, oh, I don't know, like that's going to be a thing. No other kid, because like it's this delicate balance. Like no other candidate is asking us for that, and you don't want to be the odd man out, but you do want to find the right balance. So do you have to do it on the sly?
I don't, I mean, I think you can, customers are hard. Former employees are much easier. Current employees should be really easy. I think you got to ask questions that what you're sussing out actually, as much as what the answer is whether you think that person is telling the truth, right? So ask questions, and it's easier to do this once you're in a position of having an offer in hand, right? So there might be a little bit of timing in terms of how you think about it, but if you have an offer in hand and you're really at that stage of do I go or no go, that you can ask the toughest questions in the world at that point, right? And they should be questions along the lines of, you know how responsive is your product team to customer requests that are coming in, right? What is the most frustrating thing for you about this role? What percentage of the team is hitting their quota? What would you change about this place if you could?
Have you ever? I guess the question though then becomes like you have to be ready to do something with the answers, right? And so how does a candidate get their head around? Because like once you're it's weird. It's like once you started to date, you kind of check out of the relationship you're in, right? Like, not that you should ever date while in a relationship. That's not what I'm saying at all. But you know what I mean? Like, you're in it, you're working in a company, you're like, hey, I'm going to start interviewing. You have an interview, and like, there's a part of you that starts to check out. You're like, oh, if this happens, I'm going to, like, why am I going to work on that project? I'm not going to kill myself on this one, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
But you have to be willing and able to say no. Like, hey, it's a lot more money, or maybe it's some more money, it's different responsibility, or maybe it's a promotion, right? Have you seen candidates really having that stomach to be able to do that?
Well, there's always an alternative, and it just depends on how bad or good that alternative is, right? In your current job, people generally don't interview for other jobs unless there's something about their current job that they don't like. But there's levels of misery, I guess, and it's all relative, right? Like your willingness to take some risk on a new place is going to be higher when you don't have a job, or
That's
when you
fair.
don't have a job and you don't have prospects on a job, or when you're in an awful environment. So I think that is like a comparative thing for folks, but
Yeah.
I would run away from companies that are unwilling to say anything bad uh, about themselves in the process, because I guarantee you there's something that isn't great. And you can cross reference that with people, but if you start getting very different reads and different things from different people, that's a big warning sign in my opinion. And then you got to look at the things that aren't great from the best that you can tell and say, how big a deal is this to me based on the stuff I care about? And how important will it be to my own success at this company? Is that something I can deal with it, or is it something that I can't? And I think that's going to be a little bit different for each person. I mean, some people are comfortable in an environment where there's like a really long sales cycle and it's a hard sell, but maybe they've got relationships and they feel good about it. Other people aren't going to be as confident, right? Some people need a track that's laid down in front of them and a very rigorous program that they get dropped into with all the material and all the content and all the ways of doing things. Other people are way more comfortable with ambiguity. So I think a lot of that just depends on the person, but it
Bro, we can
requires
talk
people
about
knowing
this
themselves.
topic forever, dude. Like, this is it's huge. There's so much experience here, right? Um, and I know that we've got just a list of like questions in our heads and notes and stuff. How do so we take a candidate and they say, hey, we want you. You should suss out, figure out, understand the company you're interviewing for, right? Reach out to people, talk to them. Is it really just simple as, hey, I see you work at so and so. I'm interviewing for a role. Can I talk to you and get some questions? Do you ask the hiring manager, hey, are there some people internally that I could talk to? That I would like to learn about your culture. Like, what do you think is like the actual tactical thing for them?
I think you ask the hiring manager to talk with folks that will be your peers. They should
Peers.
say yes. If they say no, again, that's to me, that's a red flag. You have to do that when you're pretty far down the process, right? Or after you've gotten the offer in hand, if it's not part of their process. But I would do that. And then I would reach out on LinkedIn to folks that used to work there. And you got to be thoughtful about that because again, if somebody didn't make their number and they got let go, they might have some bad blood, but
Yeah,
you have to kind of put it in context. But those are still potentially valuable conversations, and you probably want two or three of them just to kind of level out whatever might be unique about that person's
that's fair.
situation.
Absolutely fair.
That would be my advice. That'd be my advice.
Super fair. Really, really good points there.
All right. Well, that probably is a good place to leave it. Do you have one thing that stands out to you as a piece of advice, AJ, that you'd recommend?
Um, Yeah, I think that before candidates go in, right? Like I love the aspect of you know talking to people internally. I think asking a hiring manager. I really like that. But I do think that like candidates and people looking for roles need to figure out what's actually important to them, and they need to like have some brain time to kind of like wrap their heads around that, right? But it's also super tough. Like if you're unemployed and you're like, well, it's really important for me to get a paycheck. Like,
That
okay,
changes the equation for sure.
it does. It absolutely does, right? But but I think that being very deliberate in what you want, and then to your point, asking those questions that help illuminate that.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree with you. I think it starts with knowing yourself and knowing what makes you happy and in what type of environment you're going to be successful. And then from there, you can create your list of questions for the things that are most important and figure out who's going to be able to answer them. And then I think through the whole way, having a sense of confidence and a sense of security, even if it's been a hard journey and a hard process, is important because people also want to work with people that are confident but not arrogant
Yeah,
and self-assured. And so I think to whatever degree you can have that sense of this place would be, I could contribute here and this place would be lucky to have me, so I have the right to make sure that it's going to be a good fit for me no matter what that context is in the journey that you've been on. The more you can kind of hold that mental state without coming across as arrogant, I think is an important posture to have and
super
an important way to
super
think about it.
important. Really good, really good call out, man.
Yeah. All right. Well, as always, it was awesome speaking with you today, Anthony. Have a great one. And for everyone, we will see you in a couple of weeks. Take care.
Definitely.